Hi guys, and welcome back to the next part in our D2MS tutorial series. In this part we're going to just look at what I would call some of the simple trig types that we have in D2MS. So these are kind of trigs that we set up to perform kind of utility functions that could be useful in performance, to just breathe some life into your performance using a simple sort of drum gesture. So the first one we're going to look at is the direction trig. So usually in my case, I would tend to sort of send a direction trig from an auxiliary drum to affect one or a group of main drums. So in this instance, I'm just going to use my input 3, which has layer 1 sending to track lane 3. And I've just preset that with an ascending scale just because it makes it kind of easier to hear and understand what this trig does. So, in order to affect my rack tom input 3, I'm going to use my floor tom, which is my input 4. So I'm going to go over to input 4, and I'm going to go to the trigger context, which is this context here in our context grid. And if I just go through there, bring it back to empty. So I'm going to fill my first trig slot, of which I've got 5, and I'm going to scroll across until I reach direction. So this basically lets us sort of use an input to change the direction of another input's track lane. So to kind of hook that up, all I'm going to do is decide which track lanes that's going to send to. So I'm definitely going to make it send to track lane 3, because that's the one that we are using there. You could send to multiple track lanes. You can also send to all. And each one, basically, if we look at the trig meta here, each one of them basically lets us use a different type of direction alteration in the top part. So the sort of simple version is reverse. We can have the ping pong 2, we can make it go randomized, and then we can also make that affect a particular CC lane instead of the note lane, so we can actually have it. So for instance, you could map an input to change another input CC lane from being sort of, say, like a positive filter to a negative filter, just by changing the direction that those hits are going to be interpreted. But just to start us off with, we're going to go to note, because that's the kind of easiest one to gain understanding. So I'm going to set it up to note, and like I say, we are mapping that to track lane 3. So at the moment, before I apply that, we're kind of just moving in an upward direction. If I hit my direction trig, and obviously that doesn't have to come at a note lane end. So that's just a simple utility that lets you get a little bit more out of your track lanes by being able to play them kind of forwards and backwards, or ping pong, or move between like a dedicated pattern that we know what's going to happen and a randomized pattern. Just show you that one, for instance. So if we go to random, so because I'd come out of that previous trig type in reverse, it sort of stayed in reverse. But if we there we go. So I hope that makes sense. That's just, like I say, a simple trig type. So Just going to put that back to forward. And now we can look at the fill trig. So we'll leave the input the same because that's kind of, you understand by now how to set those up however you need. So we'll just basically move through until we reach fill. And what fill does, it basically lets us do the same as what we can manually do with our fill section here, and filling into a track lane with a different set of notes that follow either a particular form of randomization or that are all ascending or descending and so on. So that's a way of kind of refilling the track lane for whichever selected track lane or lanes you have with some new data. So that's a great way of kind of coming up with new melodies mid-performance, because rather than having to sort of fill into the grid using a gesture on the grid, you can just basically tap a surface that you've set up and send those notes straight out. So we'll leave everything the same. So the floor tom is going to be kind of the actuator of that trig, and the input of our rack tom is going to be the one that gets affected. So again, you've got the option of how that's going to be sort of filled into. By default, we've put random just because we thought that that would be kind of the most useful way to do that, so it's different notes every time. But you can do it with a particular scale ascending, scale descending, and so on. So I'm just going to leave it on random for now. And again, you can randomize particular CC lanes rather than notes by actuating the bottom two and then picking your CC track lane using the top two. But I'm just going to turn that off for now. We're just using the note lanes to try and explain the concept. So at the moment that was our default, but if I hit our actuator, so there you go. So I hope that kind of is fairly self-explanatory. It just basically means that we every time we kind of press the actuator, that lets us flood the grid with another set of random notes, which is just really nice for kind of creating some random patterns on some surfaces. Yeah. And then the third one that we'll get into is the sustain trig. So what the sustain trig does is basically allows us to again use a playing surface rather than the grid to switch between the two different types of sustain. So you can set what your sustain 1 level is using the sustain button here, and you can set a particular sustain 2 level, so sort of an on and off there, or you can just have it so it just toggles between the ones that are sort of preset, which is our 0.1 and our 2.2. Right, so let's just try and show how that works. So I've set that up exactly the same, just using the same actuator like the previous one. So I'll just basically on the actual synth itself just make that release very short so it's quite clear which version's which. Bear with me. Why is that not working? Sorry. I was missing a step in the setup. So that's kind of a happy accident. I'll explain away. So I wasn't really noticing. So as we move into the sustain section, basically that changes the upper grid to one of our other grid views. So rather than the track lane style grid view, that takes us to kind of a clone of our input and layer view, because we're picking this on a layer by layer basis rather than a track lane basis. So apologies for that. It's kind of a useful thing to explain. So yeah, we need to kind of obviously make that tie, because at the minute the grid isn't sort of it's not set up appropriately for the inputs that we're using. So you can see it's flashing away on the inputs that are being used. So that's quite a useful way of telling where you might want to be patching it, is just kind of bang away on your drum and see where's flashing. So on this one, it's obviously input 3. It's not the drum I want to affect, it's the melody. So it's input 3, track lane 1. So that is the same as what would be appearing here, input 3, track lane 1. So it's kind of just a replication of that lower section, but the upper one is the one that we kind of use to put these things together. So yes, so now we've got that sorted, we can see the sustain on the non-screen moving between the two versions. So if I just kind of finally play that. So sometimes on the actual synthesizer itself, you just have to get the decay setting for that particular synth to kind of not decay before the end note, otherwise you won't really hear the difference. So yeah, there we go. That's kind of explains the sustain trig. Sorry about the small gap in between, but I think that kind of is just how it goes when you're trying to do these live videos. Hope it all makes sense to you now. Right, so I'll see you in the next video for some more. Thanks, bye-bye.